The Great Lakes region is home to 21% of the world's surface freshwater resources. It's one of the most unique and diverse bioregions in the world. So it's not only a significant economy, it's a $5.8 trillion economy, it's also a significant bioregion as well in the world. Well, the Council of the Great Lakes region, the idea of it came about in 2011. There was a regional summit that was held in Windsor, convened by the Mowat Centre at the University of Toronto and the Brookings Institute in Washington, D.C. And it was really an opportunity to bring people together from around the region, 250 plus leaders from government and industry and academia, the NGO community participated in the event to talk about how the region comes together to look at issues around the economy, the environment, and how we can do a better job of working together across the border and across sector. I think one big conclusion that came out of the event is that there wasn't really one organization that was established in the Great Lakes St. Lawrence region to try and build the level of collaboration that is needed today to tackle some of the big issues in the region, whether it's looking at advanced manufacturing or workforce development or infrastructure or how we look at regulations at the state provincial level, and also on the environment side, how we're looking at big issues such as climate change.
Could you tell me just a little bit about how the collaboration between the United States and Canada, how it was before and how this council kind of helps to bring things together?
Well, it's a very good question, and obviously the relationship is a long-standing relationship, and it happens on a number of different levels. At the federal level, it happens between agreements and treaties in organizations like the International Joint Commission, for example, which was established by treaty in 1909. It's a very unique organization in the world. It provides both countries equal rights and responsibilities in terms of protecting shared waters and environments along the border. So the management of the relationship happens on the day-to-day basis through treaties and agreements, like the Boundary Waters Treaty on the environment side. And then you have other agreements like the North American Free Trade Agreement, the Ottawa Pact, and other agreements that really set the foundation for how the two countries work together on trade issues or environmental issues. And in a region like the Great Lakes, you also have the states and the provinces coming together more than they have before to work on issues of common interest. And I think where the Council of the Great Lakes region is unique is that it recognizes that you need to have governments there as a voice, but you also need to have academia, you need to have environmental organizations, you need to have trade associations, you need to have researchers, you need to have all of these different voices and interests at the table to really understand the different perspectives of each of those groups. And ultimately, from that, you can develop some incredible ideas and insights in terms of how you form the policies that we need to put in place today to tackle some of these very real challenges.
So tell us just a little bit about the kind of approach that you take. Like, is it hands-on, or are you helping people collaborate and communicate, or is it mainly just sitting behind a computer screen?
First and foremost, we are an organization that undertakes research. So we pull together different institutions and partners to undertake research and looking into issues that are important to the Great Lakes region. Just to give you an example, we're currently working on a report right now that's looking at the impact of climate change on water levels in the Great Lakes. And the first part of that report looked at the economic impact of climate change on water levels, and particularly the economic impact from a low water future. The second part of that report that we're undertaking is looking at how do we mitigate, how do we adapt, how do we respond to a climate change induced low water future. And so we do a lot of research with different partners to look at issues in a little more detail and try and identify region-wide solutions and findings and recommendations that we can put forward to government to consider. We also play the role of convener. So in Chicago this past April, we launched our first Great Lakes Economic Forum. So that was an event that brought together 150 plus different leaders from around the region to talk about some of the big economic policy issues facing the region. And through that, you're able to develop relationships, and through the conversations, you're able to develop new ideas and understanding in terms of key issues facing the region. And then the third, which is connected to those two pieces, the research side and the convening side, is the advocacy that we do. So when we have new research, we have new findings on particular issues, or if we're hearing about issues through our events, we bring together those different voices to advocate for change, and that can happen with industry, it happens with research, our NGO partners at the table. So advocacy also plays a big role in getting people to better understand the region, better understand the issues that we're facing in the region on the economic and environment side, and how do we work together to shift the policy agenda and trying to tackle some of these big challenges.
So what are some of the challenges and the proposed solutions, and maybe even some of the historical examples of good working relationships when it comes to balancing the economy and the environment in the Great Lakes region?
I think it happens every day. I think we've benefited from, being able to trade and use our natural resources to trade. Our success in this region, our history, is very much built on the environment, whether it's our waterways, whether it's our forests, whether it's our fisheries. So we always have to remind ourselves that we need to continue to find that balance. And I think one of the big overarching mandates for the council is to accelerate economic growth in a sustainable fashion.
What would you say would be one of the most pertinent environmental risks that you're aware of that you're trying to work on solution?
Well, I think there's the one issue, obviously, which I think is one that you're very much interested in, is looking at the impact of climate change on the region. They look at it at a global scale and sort of a regional scale. And I think on a global scale, what I see in the conversation today is the need for a reset. I think we've just had so many debates and all-out fights, in the sense, between politicians on different sides of the spectrum and researchers about what is really happening. And I think it's created a lot of noise and a lot of uncertainty in people's minds in terms of how do we respond to this challenge. I think it's an issue that will require us to change the way we interact with the earth in fundamental ways. Obviously, technology will need to play, a big role in that transition. You hear lots of debates about our use of fossil fuels and shifting to a low-carbon future, and all of those issues are the right issues to be talking about and debating. In doing that, we need to have a very pragmatic conversation about how we make that shift to a low-carbon future, and realizing that petroleum in some form will always play a role in our economy in the foreseeable future, just because of how many different products we consume in our day-to-day life that are made from the principal components of petroleum. So it's right to say, in terms of energy use, we have to figure out how we make that shift to a low-carbon economy, using clean energy and being smarter about the energy we use in our buildings, and becoming less reliant on more carbon-intensive fossil fuels. But that takes time. That takes a transition. And so I think we need to have that very pragmatic conversation about how we make that transition. It's not going to happen overnight. And I think anybody who thinks it will happen overnight is being unrealistic. When you look at the Great Lakes St. Lawrence region, it's a very real issue. I think when you look at water levels, for example, roughly $19 billion between now and 2050 could be the real impact of having to manage our economy with a low water future. So what does that mean? The amount of ship traffic that happens on the Great Lakes, with low water levels, they're able to ship less. It has an impact on hydro, has an impact on cooling for nuclear reactors. It has an impact on the way that cities draw their water from the lake, and it can also have a significant environmental impact. There's an opportunity for different kinds of species, and sometimes invasive species, to migrate into the region. What does that mean in terms of our fisheries? What does that mean in terms of our forestry? Where I have some frustration, I think, on both sides of the border, and I think this is where the council can play a role as that convener and that integrator of thinking and new ideas, is, the U.S. does their sort of national climate change assessment. As they stop at the international border, and they're segmented into two very different policy jurisdictions. On the Canadian side, obviously, we have our own process for doing assessments, so that you don't get an integrated picture in terms of what climate change means in a region like the Great Lakes. And those are the kind of conversations we're trying to start and encourage through the research that we do and the events and the conversations we have.
Oftentimes it seems like we have one camp that is calling for a complete regime change, placing all the blame on certain parties and certain individuals, and then you have another camp that, in defense of their group, might take a more extreme stance against. And it doesn't seem like we're having any talk in the middle areas, and it doesn't seem like there's a lot of consensus building. How does that make you feel as someone who is very much in tuned on a bipartisan political level?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. The extreme left, the extreme right, people tend to gravitate because they're forced to see the stark contrast. Typically, when you look at complex issues and complicated problems, they require a policy approach that is drawn from lots of different sources, tends to be in the middle. You know, I think the challenge today is that you have to cut through all of that noise and that hyperbole on both sides, and you have to try and find ways of starting with where are the common interests, where are the points where we agree, and try to bring people together on those points and start the conversation there. It's certainly more challenging and it's more time consuming, but I think what you get out of that process is a lot more impactful and meaningful than, you know, sticking to the margins in the extremes. And so it is a major shift in the way that we talk to each other, particularly on different political spectrums. The not-for-profit sector in Canada, the non-profit sector in the United States, I think we're starting to see them play a much stronger role in wanting to see those conversations happen. And I think it's a great match to the political discord that you see going on and trying to spark a different kind of process, spark a different kind of conversation. You know, we just have to be well organized, and we have to be funded, and we have to be out there demonstrating the power of the process and the value you get out of that collaborative process.
Where does the balance lie between leadership on a political level, helping to direct mass action, and on the other side, how much do individuals need to push politicians and show them what their desires are for their country when it comes to environmental issues?
I think you need both. Politicians are elected, so they tend to respond really well when they know that their core constituency back home is pushing for a change, or if there's multiple constituencies nationally pushing for a change. And active individuals can play a very important role. But again, you have to make sure that all parts of your community are engaged in that conversation. And also, you know, in terms of individual understanding, the more you know, the more things that you can do within your own life in terms of, you know, making a change. But I also think as individuals and communities and constituencies can push politicians, most politicians, they get elected because they want to lead and they want to bring people along on a journey. So I think it's important for people that are in the political space to not shy away from taking leadership on an issue, even though it means doing the right thing and not necessarily the most politically expedient thing. You know, I think on issues like climate change, you know, sometimes we stand back, leaders stand back, politicians stand back, waiting for the research to give us the 100% certainty that everyone seems to be looking for. Research is never going to give you 100% certainty. Leaders in government, if used the right way, can be an incredible force and tool to push you in a certain direction.
For you, what makes the ideal political leader, and is our system set up to allow that type of leader to utilize their abilities?
I think there are leaders out there that probably have the characteristics. The problem is when they try to lead, they just get beaten down so quickly by their opponents. It's such an adversarial system. People end up being so timid because they just know that when they're out there with an idea, they're either going to get knocked down by their opponents or knocked down by this constituency or that constituency. It's not the collaborative approach that I was talking about earlier. And so I think we need to move away from that. I think we need to listen more and speak less sometimes. When you look at the climate change conversation, whether it's the Conservative Party or the Liberal Party or the New Democratic Party at the federal level, if you look at the various components of all those different platforms, there's probably a lot of good ingredients there in terms of how we as a country should respond, but because the system is so adversarial, because it's knock them down, sort of drag them out kind of fight, we don't see all of those different ingredients, and unfortunately that holds us back in terms of our ability to be able to think about and ultimately respond to issues as big as climate change.
What kind of advice would you have for a group who is trying to enter the discussion and they're trying to communicate with people and teach them things? What's a good approach to make sure that as many people as possible are still open to hearing?
You know, I still have faith in the political process, so I think if people meet with their member of parliament, their member of provincial parliament, their city councillor, whether it's in person or whether it's by way of a letter, that's the only way democracies work. You know, I think a lot of people are starting to see the value of joining local clubs and community associations, and so I would strongly encourage that. Support the things that you care about, whether it's on the environment side or the humanitarian side. It's a way of being engaged and being active. But I think the first thing you have to do is just become aware of the issues that matter. And I know people live in busy lives, right? I have, 3 very active kids and lots of other things going on, but you've got to take the time at least to be aware of what's going on around you, whether it's local issues from the city level to global issues, because that's how democracies function. The level of disengagement is worrying. And so there's lots of different things people can do to become more active and more engaged, and there's lots of different sources that people can turn to. Take 5 minutes, take 10 minutes, to read something new every day and just be more informed and participate.
Thank you so much for this conversation, Mark. It's very good to get a balanced political perspective on these things without having to sift through the rhetoric and the you-know-what.
My pleasure.